Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, science fiction for social change. We're talk to authors about sci-fi's role in social justice movements. Malika Bilal is always out of this world. She is my sci-fi fantasy and current day.
Thank you.
Do you love sci-fi?
You know, I don't. I'm going to be honest. No, I don't.
You can leave now.
I like specific types.
Okay.
So this show is expanding my worldview, and also our community is expanding my worldview. We spoke to writers and readers of science fiction, and they told us why science fiction matters in real life. Have a listen.
I think science fiction is about exploring the wild frontier. Around the Black Lives Matter movement, looking at science fiction that centers Black lives and Black experiences has been amazing for me.
It shows people of color as innovators, as creators, as inventors, portrayals that we're not often seen in.
It gives you alternative frameworks to think about problems and issues that we all deal with every day in life.
The way that characters interact with each other, the way that we create entire worlds so that we can imagine something different from what we currently have.
Say, what would it look like if we had the world that we wanted, that we long for? That imaginative muscle work, I think, helps strengthen our capacity to vision together. And that's what actually breaks down the walls between the now and the future.
So you can tell us if and why science fiction matters to you by using hashtag AJStream.
And joining us here in our studio, we have Daniel José Older. He's the author of the sci-fi book Shadowshaper and Half Resurrection Blues. We'll hear more about Daniel's work in a moment. But first, let me give you a little bit more background. Now, sci-fi often evokes images of space travel and future technology, but fantasy worlds are also being used to examine attitudes towards sexism, racism, violence, and other injustices. Through imagination and prose, sci-fi writers are challenging the status quo to create alternative realities. So can science fiction actually cause social change? With us to talk about this via Skype from Oregon in the US, we have Walidah Imarisha. She's a writer, activist, co-author, co-editor of the book Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction Stories from Social Justice Movements. Hi, Walidah.
Thanks for having me.
And she also speaks a little bit of Klingon. Prove it.
Oh, just a little, just enough to get around Konos if I need to, you know, kaplach. So
that's it?
A little bit.
That's it?
You said a little bit.
All right, and what does that actually mean, Walidah?
I mean, it means welcome, good luck, go kill some folks, hope you're successful, and drink the blood of your enemies.
Okay, that's perfect for the introduction for the next guest. Kapak. In London, Zen Cho is author of the fantasy novel Sorcerer to the Crown. And in Los Angeles, Mark Oshiro, a science fiction fan who runs the blog Mark Reads. He helped edit a magazine series of LGBT sci-fi called Lightspeed Queers Destroy Science Fiction. Good to have you here, everybody.
Thank you.
Daniel,
yes.
I'm going to warn you here.
I'm
going to get everybody to read a little bit so that we get a sense of what we're talking about through the show. But let's start off with your choice.
Okay.
What do you have? What are you going to share with us?
I'm going to read from Shadowshaper, which is my young adult fantasy novel set in Brooklyn. Right. It's about Sierra Santiago, who's a 16-year-old Puerto Rican girl in Brooklyn who paints murals and finds out that she's a part of this huge spiritual legacy where people, it's called shadowshaping, and people basically bring murals to life by putting spirits into them. And then the spirits can do stuff and fight bad guys and do all this cool thing. So in this moment, she's found out that one of her friends, this hot dude named Robbie, who's Haitian, is also a shadow shaper. And he's going to teach her how to shadow shape, basically. So they go to Prospect Park, as you do when you find out you're a shadow shaper.
That's in Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn.
Yeah.
My favorite place.
Used to be my local park.
I mean, it's the best park in the world.
It's a gorgeous park.
Yeah, so
meanwhile, back at Shadowshaper.
Exactly.
What are you reading?
Back in Shadowshaper. So I'm going to read the section where she's going through the woods trying to find Robbie because she's practicing shadow shaping. Okay. Sierra ran. She didn't care about what she might run into or what direction she was going. All she wanted was to get away from that noise. But the sound kept with her, burned incessantly through her ears, trailed her like a stalker around every turn. Branches slapped against her face and arms, biting into her skin. She saw a log up ahead, planted one foot hard on the ground, and threw her body into the air. It was only after she'd sailed over the log and landed several feet past it that she realized something was different. First of all, she'd seen the log lying there right across her path, It wasn't just her eyes adjusting to the darkness. She could see everything around her in crisp detail. And then there was the jump. She'd been airborne for 5 or 6 seconds easily. She had basically glided along until she felt ready to land. For a flickering moment, Sierra saw herself as if from above, bounding through the forest in long strides, nailing each leap. It was terrific and terrifying at the same time, like she was some kind of superhero, and then she was back without having lost a step. She hadn't escaped the voices. In fact, they were louder, and now she could make out dark shapes moving along the edge of her vision. She turned, her suddenly spectacular eyesight capturing every nook and nub of each tree, and she realized that there were indeed tall shadows rushing along on either side of her. They emitted a slight pulsing glow, a single illuminated heart beating through each one.
Very nice.
Wow, he's going to leave us hanging.
I will leave you with that.
Oh my goodness. Mark, you review Sci-fi.
Yes.
What did you make of that?
I mean, I'm a huge fan of Daniel José Older anyway.
Yeah.
Hi, Daniel. I just love it because I'm going to gas you up a little bit, Daniel, but it's his description, and it's so emotional, and that's one of the things I love about his work. Is it's always present, it's always right there.
Yeah. What got you into sci-fi, Mark?
What's that?
What got you into sci-fi? What got you hooked?
Star Wars and Ursula K. Le Guin. I was very lucky enough to have parents who saw the movies in the theaters when they came out. I was born in '83, so by the time I was like 3 or 4 years old, they were like, okay, we're going to start watching Star Wars. Here we go.
Tell us about Ursula for the uninitiated who are coming to this sci-fi as a new genre.
So I think what was really important for me and for Ursula K. Le Guin, why I was so drawn to Ursula K. Le Guin was that she went out of her way to write stories where characters of color were the protagonists.
Yeah.
She had very vocal battles with a lot of the work that she was doing, where her covers were often whitewashed, where the main character was not a white person. And then certain versions of her covers would actually portray that, and so she had a lot of very public battles about that. And so, as someone who was, a little nerd of color, it was the coolest thing because I was like, oh, here's someone who will not only fight for me, but I can see myself in her work.
So, Walidah, I see you nodding there, and this conversation is going to have lots of recommendations for people if they write them down for sci-fi favorites. And one of the ones online that got the most mentions, I think probably not surprisingly, is Star Trek. So this is Netza Blocker, who says Star Trek, at its release time, predicted and showed things unimaginable. Women in upper ranks of military, the end of the Cold War. Another person goes on to say it made racial equality a central theme, even in the original series. And this last person, also picking up on that theme, says, what's science fiction without social change? It's like watching Mr. Spock, you see him there, and not feeling the force of change. So was Star Trek one of the things that got you hooked? And can you see why people are so drawn to it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm actually, I don't know if folks can tell, but I'm rocking my Star Trek pendant. So this is actually my nerd detector, the sci-fi my folks. Some people are like, oh, that's beautiful. And some people are like, oh, and I was like, I see you. But my earliest memory is watching Star Trek. I dressed up as Lieutenant Uhura, who was the Black Bridge officer for, years until the outfit no longer fit. It was really important to me. And also as I got older, it was also important to be able to kind of reflect and critique on Star Trek and think about, okay, yes, this is a really powerful, exciting future that is also rooted in militarism, imperialism, colonialization of, the universe. And I think that was important for me to be able to say, I can take these pieces that are really important to me, and I can also add my own vision for the future.
Sure.
While still learning Klingonese.
Yeah, and also dialogue that Uhuru delivered on Star Trek, right? You kind of invented your own. Yeah. Could you do a little bit for us?
Well, unfortunately, most of her dialogue ended up really being hailing frequencies open, Captain. But, there was a great episode, The Savage Curtain, where Abraham Lincoln came back from the dead. It maybe sounded better on paper. And he actually, interestingly, people are like, oh, Star Trek is this post-racial world. And he speaks to Uhura and he goes, oh, what a lovely negress. And then he's like, oh, my bad, that might be offensive. And you could see Nichelle Nichols, the actress, being like, they don't pay me enough for this. But, they made the character say, "Oh, why should it be offensive? We've moved beyond the world where words can hurt us." And that was the moment where I was like, "I'm gonna need more than that. I'm gonna need more than that."
Yeah. Yeah.
I want you to. I'm gonna need you to backhand Abraham Lincoln right now a little bit.
So Daniel, was there a moment where you were just totally hooked? I was reading sci-fi from when I was a little kid, and I kind of stopped when I was about 20.
Right.
So I had like 10 good years.
Yep, I'm the same way. I was actually a Star Wars kid. I loved Star Wars through and through. Star Trek never really did it for me.
What?
Sorry, everybody.
True.
I know.
What?
I'm staying though. I'm staying right here.
All right.
I like
I
it.
have a theory about Star Wars versus Star Trek people.
And your theory is what?
Oh, go ahead. I want to hear this.
Well, I think Star Wars never really did it for me, and I think it's because it's like too operatic. I mean, it's like the definitional space opera, right? And like Star Trek is basically sort of mostly nice people sitting around in rooms having conversations about what the right thing to do is, and that's totally my jam. And so I think if you like Star Trek, you're gonna like one kind of story. You like Star Wars, you're gonna like another kind of kind of epic fantasy, that kind of
that might be it.
that kind of stuff. And I'm really into.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that.
I hear that because I like fantasy probably a little bit more than sci-fi in general, and I don't like stories about nice people talking to each other. Makes me crazy. So I hear that. That's probably true. But Star Wars is what hooked me.
Yeah.
And then I also left, a little bit. I left it behind kind of. I loved The Lord of the Rings when I was a kid, and I loved, all that general stuff. And then I went to college, I don't know, and I started studying social science, and I got kind of radical, and I was, studying politics and everything. And I put it down. And then I picked it back up again with Octavia Butler and the Harry Potter series. And that combined with Walter Mosley, who's amazing, more his noir
That's
detective
an amazing
work.
combination.
Yeah,
Octavia
right?
Butler.
It is. It really is.
Let's just pause for Octavia Butler, because there's no way we could get through this conversation without Octavia Butler. Mark is geeking out right now.
I think we all are.
I can't.
We are going to show.
I mean, I think everyone.
Yeah, we're going to show a couple of
everyone
pictures
here.
of Octavia Butler,
Yes.
and then you can all do let's do group think. Mark, you start off. Why is she important to this genre?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Let me jump in. I'm gonna start.
Yeah, please
I
do.
got it.
I don't
right here.
know.
I got it right on the tip of my tongue, and I love
Okay,
Octavia.
do it.
Octavia is one of the reasons that I write, and I think a lot of that's true for so many of us. But she talked about power in such a complicated way, in such a profound way, and she just would go in the power dynamics between characters, between different alien races, the use of magic as a form of power in ways that no other sci-fi or fantasy writer has really gotten to that same depth. And I read that and I was like, whoa, you can do this and still tell a really great story, a really deep, fascinating, amazing story that you need to know the end of, but it says all this stuff about the world we're living in without being preachy, but really just allowing you to open that space and go in and think about stuff in an uncomfortable but a fascinating way that really pushes our boundaries.
Zen, I want to pose something to you based on what people are saying online about why the stories you guys are telling right now are so important and applicable to our everyday lives. So there's a tweet here from Thistle who says, science fiction creates the what if question in people's minds, and that sticks with them for a long time. And so picking up on that, I want to play you a video comment. And this is from someone named Morrigan, who's actually a social worker, and she gives us an interesting parallel to her own life. So have a listen.
As a social worker, one of the jobs that I have and many social workers have is that we are working with people to try and help them imagine a new world and a new way to exist in the world that helps them to navigate hardships and challenges and things that are thrust upon them. And so all of that is the work of science fiction. And so like Walidah says a lot, all organizing is science fiction. And I think to a certain extent, a lot of social work is science fiction work because you're imagining a new world for somebody.
Suzanne, imagining these new worlds, that's something I wouldn't have thought about, but you agree?
I really love that. And I see a real direct line between kind of the what if and imagining new worlds and what we were talking about just now with Octavia Butler. Because I think every science fiction fantasy reader, particularly science fiction, has that experience where you read something, you're like, oh, suddenly I just see the whole world in a different way. And it could be just one work or one line. And one thing I always remember from Octavia Butler is that one of her she has a line in one book, and I can't remember which, but she says, the essential characteristic of human beings is that they are hierarchical. They're profoundly invested in hierarchy, and that had never occurred to me before. And I remember sort of reading like, oh, and it's when you read something that's, I guess, set in an alternate world about different, maybe a different planet or a completely different world, and yet because it places you in that context of difference, it can tell you something that's really true and kind of in a really effective way about our own world.
So Zen, in The Sorcerer to the Crown, what kind of world did you create? Because one of the things we're talking about today is that social justice, the idea of sci-fi and fantasy creating a world where there's more social justice. What was the world that you created that is relevant to this conversation?
Well, actually, so science fiction is kind of like forward-looking, right? And then fantasy, a lot of people argue, is quite conservative. It's it's all these kind of farm boy becomes a king and that kind of thing. But I think it's actually really important to be able to see history with new eyes, because a lot of what we learn about our history is very, it's kind of history being written by the winners, by the powerful. And so Sorcerer to the Crown came about when I grew up reading these novels from 19th century Britain, which were like fantasy to me. As a kid living in 20th century Malaysia, it's like, oh, they have like, all this technology, like carriages, horse-drawn carriages, and handkerchiefs,
and crumpets and butter as well.
Yeah, right.
Lots of crumpets and butter in Charles Dickens.
But like Sorcerer to the Crown is kind of it's meant to just be like a fun, lighthearted book, but it's also placing people of color at the center of that kind of novel, and sort of reveal to in a kind of very small way to try to reveal the whole colonial, the whole empire that was underpinning kind of society.
Read the beginning of your novel. Just give us a little taste, just a little bit, little teaser. Makes us want to go out and buy it.
Sorcerer to the Crown is about England's first African sorcerer royal, and it's set in 1808, and it starts like this. The meeting of the Royal Society of the Natural Philosophers was well underway, and the entrance hall was almost empty. Only the occasional tardy magician passed through, scarcely sparing a glance for the child waiting there. Boy children of his type were not an uncommon sight in the society rooms. The child was less unusual, less for his complexion than for his apparent idleness. Unlike the society's splendidly liveried pages, he was soberly dressed, and he was young for a page boy, having just attained his 6th summer. And so the reference to the page kind of locates you, the page boys locates you in that 19th century, because it was very fashionable around that time, a bit earlier, in 1790s to kind of early 1800s, for rich white people basically to have young black boys as page boys, because they were kind of decorative. And people don't realize that. People have a very white concept of European history, right? And it's not an accurate concept. So I think fantasy has a role in kind of breaking open.
And Zen, as you're saying that, I see Mark nodding there, and also see Daniel nodding. But Mark, I want to go to you with that idea of representation, because we got this tweet from someone who says, science fiction can do something as simple as put people of color in future states, center their experiences, imagine them as part of the fantastical. But on the other hand, a little bit of pushback, this is someone who says science fiction also reflects the imaginations of those who are doing the imagining. And for the example is, in the past, science fiction inspired the creation of all white towns and technology used in war. And I hear you saying yes. So what do you make of that dichotomy?
Yeah. I mean, the diversity conversation is always a complex thing. I've been doing this panel over the last, year and a half at different conventions called Erasure is Not Equality, where I talk about how science fiction and fantasy authors will often, in order to not deal with the issues or because of their own biases, they'll create all white worlds without thinking about it. And people don't question that and why that happens. And Zen brought up a great point, which is that a lot of times what people will rely on is, I'm being historically accurate. Well, you're actually wrong. That isn't what history was like. This is not actually what these populations are like. We haven't mentioned it yet. There's a great person on Tumblr who goes by Medieval POC, who's been doing wonderful work to dispel the notion that people of color do not appear in any of these places around the world. And they do a lot of great scholarship for that. And so that's something that I was very interested in, not only in the work I do reviewing science fiction and fantasy, but in the creation of my own, my novel as well. It's something that's always on my mind. And it's something that I challenge myself to think about who I'm putting in these stories, who gets the focus of them, who gets to be the hero, who gets to be the villain, that sort of thing.
Who's the biggest Star Wars fan here? Is it Daniel?
Oh, no, you all lose. It's me.
Oh, all right. Okay, Mark. All right. Mark.
It's me.
We need a lightsaber battle.
An entire sleeve.
Ooh, dare we go higher?
I have...
Wow, he's
all the way
going.
up to Death Star.
This is fantastic.
So you all lose, it's me.
All right, okay, we lose gracefully. I wanted to have a look at my laptop here, Mark. Lean forward.
Yeah.
Have a look here at my laptop. Who is this character?
No, don't even. My dream, my real first fictional crush was actually Lando Calrissian.
Yes.
And which is a weird thing because, it's something that, because of Chuck Wendig's novel that he just wrote, the Aftermath novel, in the Star Wars universe, it's a conversation I feel hasn't really happened, except in a negative sense. But growing up, being gay and being a Star Wars fan was a very strange thing because that universe is so overwhelmingly straight. And I could never talk about my love of Lando Calrissian in a different sense. It's something I had brought up before and I've spoken about is how common Han Solo is as a character, or how similar Han Solo and Lando is, and how much more negative opinions you'll see of Lando for making the decisions that he does, for being this sort of rogue character. When I'm like, well, Han Solo is also a rogue, and he makes sort of gray moral decisions
Mark,
and whatnot.
are you ready for me to blow your mind? Okay. This
Yes,
character, this actor is Billy D. Williams, and he's a relative of Malika. Tell us about him.
No, what? Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
A distant cousin from the Williams side of the family.
From a galaxy far, far away.
Very true.
Oh man, we are getting cheesy. All right, save us. Depth, Walidah. Why is this conversation important? We ask that question about science fiction. Can it help us create social justice in the real world? Can it, Walidah?
I would say absolutely yes. I mean, you had Morgan Phillips, who talked about being a social worker. It's actually also a contributor to Octavia's Brood, science fiction stories from social justice movement, which is the book that I co-edited with my co-editor, Adrienne Marie Brown. And it is science fiction written by organizers, activists, and change makers. The majority of folks had never written science fiction before, had never written fiction before. But our premise is that all organizing is science fiction. So we felt that organizers were the perfect people to write science fiction because they are holding all of these visionary, imaginary worlds in them every single day. Yeah. Every time we imagine a world without prisons, without borders, without capitalism, without poverty, that is science fiction. We've never seen that world. But also, referencing Ursula K. Le Guin, we can't build things that we can't imagine. And so we need writers who can imagine freedom and also remember freedom and show us ways towards that freedom. And our book is named in honor of Octavia Butler, Octavia's Brood.
Of course.
Because we feel like she encapsulates so much all of the principles and values and visions that we are hoping to, put forward, not just in the anthology, but also in the workshops that we do around the country.
Walidah, I'm just going to squeeze in a little bit of community before the end of this part of the show.
Well, Daniel, if you could give us your answer in 30 seconds, because you heard what Walidah said, but this question is then how do you straddle the line between calling and becoming preachy?
That is the question, right?
In 30 seconds.
Right, in 30 seconds. A lot of it comes down to telling the truth about the world we live in, right? So these conversations about diversity and, people act like it's something people are trying to impose on the conversation. Diversity is honesty. It's about looking at the world and seeing what it is. And then finally, real quick, it's about those power dynamics that go on. So one thing I love about Zen Cho's book, for instance, is that it's not just about having people of color there and present, which is huge. It's also about looking at the real power dynamics that go on, whether it's racism or sexism or homophobia, all these different things that happen, and being real about those.
Daniel José Older, the most important question of the entire show, Star Trek or Star Wars?
I've already staken my claim. Star Wars through and through.
Star Trek, Star Wars?
I refuse to choose. I am part of the Rebel Alliance and the Maquis Freedom Fighters. I can be that bridge.
Zen, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek.
And Mark, I think I know this. The arm says
feel like
everything
my
I need to know.
tattoo chose, but Star Wars. Star Wars.
It's written all over your body.
Star Trek. Thank you very much, everybody, for being part of this stream. We're going online at stream.alzira.com. See you there. Take care. Hello again, this is the Streams Online post show. Didn't that go fast? Oh my goodness, how do we get through 30 minutes that quickly? Let's talk about sexuality and sci-fi and fantasy. Well, who wants to deal with that? Who wants to start us off with that? Mark is like, no.
Go ahead, Mark.
All right, can I show you something? This is my secret sort of perv here. This is here. Captain Jack Harkness from a series called Torchwood in the UK. It was a spin-off from Doctor Who. And he is every sexuality. Men like him, women like him, aliens like him, grannies like him, everybody loves him. And it wasn't even an issue in the series. It was fun and nobody was offended. How did they do that, Mark?
Well, okay. Well, I would say it's not so much that no one was offended. It was. I think for the first time you have a pansexual character whose sexuality is presented in the same way often heterosexual men are presented, which is that here is someone who can have, I guess, sexual conquests and have sexual relations with people and be open about it. And what's interesting is the very few detractors I ever saw concerning Jack Harkness's sexuality would often say things like, well, how dare they do this? They're just rubbing it on our faces that he's not straight. And the easiest way to counter that argument is, what about all of the straight characters who have been rubbing their sexuality in our face?
Pretty much ever.
In the history of movies or books.
And they just had such joy about it. He'd wear fantastic leather, swish around in fantastic clothes, snog whoever was there, move on. It was so much fun.
It was.
Yeah.
Well, it was also nice to have a character who could also show affection and a lot of the stuff with Yanto and it's hard to explain it to some people when you say I crave seeing affection between people of the same gender or seeing sexualities that are not heterosexual displayed on screen, and it's something that I try to do through my work is explain what that gap feels like, to have that chasm in your life where you don't actually get to experience these things except in very rare moments. And that's something that's really important to me about seeing that stuff is it normalizes it, which isn't to say that, we want to all be the same or anything, but it says that this is something that people do. Get over it.
Well, since we're talking,
there was an article. There was an article that was actually about Daniel's book recently. I forget where, but it was talking about the fact that at Shadowshaper, Daniel has this adorable high school queer couple, and they're just part of the Friends, and they have their own personalities. They're not just queer, but they are this adorable, very sweet, loving, funny couple that is part of this pantheon of friendships. And the article was basically like, yeah, that should happen in every book that has more than like two characters. You should have queer folks, because that's the reality of the world we live in. And I felt that same way when I read Shadowshaper. I was like, oh my God, it's so beautiful that they're here and that it's reality and it's everyone loves them because of who they are, and it's not an issue.
And it's always the folks that always see themselves that want to talk about, oh, why do you need to see yourself, right? Like they're not actually equipped to judge.
That's a good point.
How much that matters to someone, because they've always seen themselves.
Ask that, because I'm going to give you this tweet. This is from Terry, a very frequent stream tweeter, and we love her tweet. She says, so often when white sci-fi writers imagine a future, and I'm sure you could swap out white for straight or whatever you want, she says they erase us from it without even realizing. Right. But on the other hand, though, because you made that point already, this is David, and he says, are we claiming racism in science fiction now? Has there ever been a huge black audience for science fiction?
Oh my God,
yes. Really? First of all, yes. Second of all, yes.
When will people stop?
Third of all, yes. I think the history of science fiction and fantasy has been defined by racism and by sexism. We're just now starting to get to a point where a lot of other voices are raised And that's an amazing moment to live in. And you'll see the pushback, because again, it's folks that are so used to having themselves on the screen and on the covers that are like, whoa, wait a minute, you mean, suddenly it's political. It's always been political. Fantasy and sci-fi have always been tools of imperialism, and that's just, that's very political, but it's normalized. So we're like, oh yeah, that's just what it is. No, it's a choice that people make. So it's an exciting time. This is a great moment.
If I may jump in too, I think there is a misconception in that tweet, and it's something that, so for example, I grew up in a place where the majority of the people around me, my friends and whatnot, were black and brown. That's just how it was. We all loved science fiction. We all went, we loved Blade. We thought the Blade movies were great. The thing is that people have a misconception that because some of these people aren't going to, for example, science fiction conventions, or they're not being portrayed on, in movies and documentaries, that we were never here. No, we've been here this entire time,
right.
And we've loved science fiction. It's that no one's paying attention to us. There's this idea. I don't like that argument, because it erases the people who are science fiction fans, who are of color, who are queer, who are at the intersection of all of these identities. We've been here the entire time. You're just not paying attention to it.
When I went to Comic-Con and was surrounded by people of color who were in all kinds of costumes from all different, and I was like, I'm home. I literally shed a single tear down my cheek, because I was like, because all the other sci-fi cons that I've been to, which are more on the professional end and writers, are very, very white. And it was amazing to be in this place where it was a very safe space for people of color. It was very
Daniel
beautiful
and I had
thing.
exactly the same experience at San Diego Comic Con. It was like, oh, why would anyone go to a science fiction con?
Right. It's like, wow, look at this.
Which are very white.
Yes, absolutely. And just one more thing. Sanana Reeve has a collection of short stories out called Ghost Summer, which is amazing. It came out this year. She's an amazing writer. And there's a story in there it's a post-apocalypse, future world, and there's a Mexican character, and I read it, and I'm not even Mexican, I'm Latino, I'm Cuban. But just to see a Latino in the future, again, I had this moment of like, oh, we made it. Oh my God, we survived. It was so profound for me. And he's just a regular schmo in the future. And I was just like, yes, regular schmo.
Regular schmo in the future.
Yes.
Actually, I want to show you something. We did this story last year. I want you to look at the date here. December the 1st, 2014. Get used to black stormtroopers. Star Wars is coming out next Friday. People are still upset that, let me just click one more click here. Come back to my laptop, please. Here we go. Yeah, I'm not white. It's like, what? Why can't there be people of color, ethnicities in the future? Why are people getting upset about this?
That's white fragility at its best, by which I mean worst. When you've seen yourself again and again and suddenly you don't, and then, you have a fit about it. But, I'd like to think that these are mostly trolls on the fringes that are getting a lot of attention because for whatever reason those tweets get viral and, BuzzFeed picks them up or whatever. But I think the vast majority of people are going to this movie and are just excited to see a movie. And then there's a lot of us that are really excited to see a black man be a stormtrooper and a Jedi and whatever else he is. That's great.
Yeah, very cool. Walidah, what was the reading you were going to do for us?
Oh, I was going to read
Just a little
from, Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who is a brilliant Black feminist, poetic scholar visionary, included a piece called Evidence in Octavia's Brood, and it's set in a future society post kind of transformative justice revolution. So there's just an intro piece from the council. By reading past this point, you agree that you are accountable to the council. You affirm our collective agreement that in the time of accountability, the time past law and order, the story is the storehouse of justice. You remember that justice is no longer punishment. You affirm that the time of crime was an era of refused understanding and stunted evolution. We believe now in the experience of brilliance on the scale of the intergalactic tribe. Today, the evidence we need is legacy. We are grateful that you are reading this. Thank you for remembering. With love and what our ancestors called faith, the intergenerational council of possible elders.
I love that. Thank you for that. And because you read something from your anthology, I'm going to have us listen to a video comment from the co-editor of that anthology who sent this to us. This is Adrienne. I want you to have a listen to what she said, Zen.
One of my favorite stories, actually, for understanding this is The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, which is by Ursula Le Guin. And the story is about a society in which everything is completely utopian, but in order for that utopia to continue, there's a child who's locked in a dirty basement and punished and tortured for their whole life. And everyone at some point in the society has to come and look at that. And I feel like that's, to me, one of the most amazing parables for this current life that we live in, where any luxury, any comfort we have is directly tied to the suffering and the disempowerment of other people and the stripping of resources from land. And how do we actually build a society that doesn't come with that as a core compromise?
So Zen, that's a really big question. What are your thoughts on that?
How do we build a society that doesn't come with abuelas? Oh God. Yeah, I think it just takes like incremental work and you know, a dedication to visions of a better future. And you know, I'd obviously say this because I write historical fiction, but I think that requires as well a clear understanding of our past. And you know, it goes back to what Mark was saying about the fact that erasure is you know, something that it's one of the tools of how oppressive systems sustain themselves and perpetuate themselves, and they wipe out the contributions that marginalized peoples make to societies, and they obscure you know, kind of true histories, and they require us to learn and relearn what the truth is and how to build a good society. So which is very hard to kind of make progress when you keep having to start from scratch. I mean, that's deep, man.
Yeah, I would love to keep you for the rest of the day, and we could chat about this all the time, but hey, that's what conferences are for, right? So I'm going to say thank you to the guests. We have Daniel José Older, Walidah Imarisha, Zen Cho, and Mark Oshiro. And just in the interest of equal opportunity, I will say live long and prosper, and may the force be with you. Thanks, guests. Take care.
Thank you.